adversary. He argues with HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a week. I'm not good enough. They're not good enough. Get somebody else. I stutter. I have this problem. I have that problem. According to Chazal, it was an entire week. He's arguing with Hashem for an entire week. But finally, HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of says, you're going whether you like it or not, and Aaron is going to be your interpreter. So Moshe is very reluctant. He goes to Pharaoh, and through Aaron he communicates the idea, let the Jewish people go. They should no longer be slaves. And Pharaoh says very contemptuously, who is this God that you're talking about that I should listen to his voice? He checks his list. He has a list of all of the idols, all of the gods. God is not on the guest list. Who is this God that I should listen to his voice? And then he makes the argument, you Jews have too much time on your hands. That's why you agitate about civil rights and about freedom, because you're not busy enough. So from now on, I'm going to make it a little worse for you. You're not going to have time. That, you have to make bricks, and the bricks are made with straw, and it used to be the Egyptians gave them the straw. From now on, you're going to have to gather your straw, and your quota of bricks is going to be the same. So not only did Moshe Rabbeinu not accomplish his mission, but Moshe Rabbeinu made life worse. Just imagine yourself, you're Moshe Rabbeinu, and you walk out, and all of the Jewish slaves whose life has just been made a lot worse are staring balefully at him. They don't know. I mean, we know who Moshe Rabbeinu is because we know the rest of the Torah. But at that point in life, they looked at him as somebody who was worthless, somebody who just made their life miserable. And this actually breaks Moshe Rabbeinu. There are a few places in the Torah where Moshe Rabbeinu's spirit is broken. And he says to God, I didn't want to go. I didn't think it would work. Why did you make things worse for your people? Why did you send me? I begged and I begged and I begged. I mean, it's a funny conversation in a way. He's talking to God. He says, I knew it wouldn't work. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent him, but he says, I knew it wouldn't work. Why did you send me? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu essentially says, you don't have the faith of the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, I also made many promises to them, which I did not fulfill in their lifetimes. But they had faith, and they knew that I would fulfill it. And you now doubt that I will fulfill my promises. Right? So it's a very interesting conversation. It's a point, I know, from the yeshiva perspective that everybody is always perfect. How could Moshe quit? But sometimes, I'll get in trouble for this one, but sometimes you do have to look at things through a human prism. Moshe Rabbeinu, frankly, is broken at this point. Because it's his worst nightmare. All he wanted to do was help. I mean, imagine we face similar situations, usually not as drastic, never as drastic. We wanted to help, and everything just fell apart, and we made things worse than they were before we went on the scene. So at this point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu introduces 4 terms of redemption. Therefore, go tell Bnei Yisrael, I am the God who is reliable and dependable. And then there are 4 terms, and I will take them out of Egypt, and I will rescue them from their burdens, and I will redeem them with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, and I will take them unto me as a nation, and I will bring them to the land of Israel that I had promised Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So here, it's well known that there are actually 5 expressions of redemption that are used. V'hotzesi, I will take them out. V'hitzalti, I will save them. V'go'alti, I will redeem them. V'hotzesi, v'hitzalti, v'go'alti, v'lokachti, and I will take them unto me for a nation. Those are 4. And the 5th one is, I will bring them to the land. Now we know that the Talmud Yerushalmi tells us, all of us know that one of the mitzvos of the Seder night and if you're in Chutz La'aretz, the 2 Seders, is that we drink 4 cups of wine or grape juice at the Seder. Now, this is not a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Torah does not say you have to drink wine. The Torah says you have to eat matzah and bitter herbs. But the Dalit Kosos is a rabbinic law. But the Talmud Yerushalmi says that the basis of the rabbinic law is to correspond to the 4 terms of redemption. I will take you, I will save you, I will redeem you, and I will take you unto me for a nation. 4 lashonot of Geula, 4 terms of redemption, and Chazal were mesakein, Chazal enacted that we drink 4 cups of wine to commemorate the 4 terms of redemption. Now you may ask me, why do I say there are 4 terms of redemption? Didn't I quote the pasuk? And there's a 5th term of redemption. I will bring you unto the land that I promised Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So here are a few points. There actually is an opinion in the Gemara. We don't pass it that way, obviously, that says you should have a 5th cup because of that 5th term of redemption. That is the view of Rabbi Tarfon, number 1. And even though halachically we do not paskin like Rabbi Tarfon, there are some minhagim, particularly among some groups of Hasidim, that have an optional 5th cup at the Seder. Now, why is it that most people don't do that, and we only have 4 cups? Because we understand that the 5th language, I will bring you to the land, is not just referring to the Jewish people in the time of Yehoshua, but it refers to the ultimate Messianic coming back to the land, which will be permanent and forever. And that hasn't yet been fulfilled. And since it has not yet been fulfilled, we do not yet have a 5th cup. When Moshiach comes, we will have a 5th cup, but we don't have a 5th cup before Moshiach comes. And that is the halachic source of the Ashkenazic custom of what is called the Kos of Eliyahu, Elijah's cup. Now it is Ashkenazic. It's not a Sephardi minhag, although some Sephardim have copied it. And that is that, as you know, we drink 4 cups of wine, but at the Seder there is a 5th cup that is poured, and that is called the cup of Eliyahu Hanavi. And countless generations of parents always tell their child, Lahavdil is kind of like equivalent to the Christmas stories of Santa Claus. So we have a story about Eliyahu Hanavi, that Eliyahu Hanavi will come and take a little sip of the cup of wine and watch the cup, and you'll see it has less wine. And what Dad is going to do is, Dad's going to shake the table, see the wine went down, and the like. Now, the truth is, that is a Baba Maisa. We don't believe Eliyahu Hanavi drinks. On the other hand, there is a medrash that says Eliyahu Hanavi does visit every Seder, and he comes to every bris. At a bris, we know that, right? We actually have a chair in honor of Eliyahu Hanavi. Now, here is what the idea is. Eliyahu Hanavi has many, many jobs. One of his jobs is he's going to announce the coming of Moshiach. So, since we're not going to have the 5th cup until Moshiach comes, we put the cup on the table waiting for Eliyahu Hanavi to come and announce Moshiach, and then we'll have the 5th cup. That is why it's Elijah's cup, because we only have 4 cups because of the 4 Lashonos of redemption. The 5th cup awaits the coming of Moshiach, which will be announced by Eliyahu Hanavi. Now, what do you do with Elijah's cup after the Seder? So again, it's not kadosh. I mean, basically, after the Seder, you can just pour it back into the bottle, or you can use it for tomorrow's kiddush or whatever it is. Meaning, there's no permanent, sanctity that is attached to it, but it is a sign and a symbol of redemption in our belief in Moshiach. This is an important idea. It's a little unfortunate. Maybe because you've already had 3 cups of wine by the time you get to the after the meal part of the Seder. But even people who try to keep the Seder, religious or non-religious, even non-religious people try to keep some semblance of a Seder, they often kind of tune out after the meal. Because after all, it's getting late. The Haggadah took a long time till you got to the foods. You've already had 3 cups of wine, because the first cup is the Kiddush cup. The second cup is when you say the Magid, after the Haggadah narrative, you have a cup. And then the third cup is after benching. And then we begin with Hallel and the songs. Now, the problem is a lot of people tune out at that point. They're very, very tired. But the truth of the matter is one has to understand that the second half of the Seder has actually a different focus than the first half of the Seder. The first half of the Seder before the meal is all about commemorating the Exodus and remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim. The second half is looking towards the Messianic Redemption. And that's why it's very, very deep, very, very profound. That's why it begins with opening the door for Eliyahu Hanavi. In fact, I remember reading, it was a very poignant scene, a woman who had survived the Holocaust, and she was a little girl during the Holocaust. She recalls the last Seder that she had with her parents in Poland in 1939 in one of the ghettos. Maybe it was the Worst of Ghetto. And, Poland had already been occupied and Jews were being deported to concentration camps, but there were still Jews living in the ghetto who had not yet been deported, although the conditions were very ominous. And she recalls that when her father got up to open the door for Eliyahu Hanavi, he got up kind of with a certain enthusiasm, because he really, really believed that the suffering of the Jewish people was so intense that Eliyahu Hanavi has to come. There has to be a Moshiach. And he opened the door. And he didn't see anything. Obviously, he didn't see Eliyahu Hanavi, although spiritually he may have been there. And she recalls how his face turned white, and he began shaking, quivering. And he was just talking to himself as if he was in a trance. How could it be? How could he not be here? What happened? What more needs to happen? What more needs to be done? And she said that that was the last Seder they had, because then her parents were taken to concentration camps, etc. But that's how it was. There was such a hope Eliyahu Hanavi would come. We should have that hope. The truth is, we should also have that hope. The truth is, Baruch Hashem, even with our war and everything else, we're not in the same desperate conditions. But that is why we have Kos Shel Eliyahu Hanavi. And that's why the second part of the Seder is actually very, very powerful, because it's messianic. You're thinking about Moshiach. Okay. So be it as it may, therefore, although there are 5 terms of redemption, we only commemorate 4 of them by the 4 cups of wine, because the 5th Lashon is messianic, and that is symbolized by Elijah's cup, by the Kos Shel Eliyahu. Now, as I say, it's an Ashkenazic custom. We're not exactly sure when it originated. Sephardim don't have Kos Shel Eliyahu unless they've borrowed. In the course of time, there's been a lot of cross-fertilization between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. So some Ashkenazim do some Sephardic stuff, some Sephardim do Ashkenazic stuff. So we're kind of a little more open. But in a pure Sephardic minhag, there is no Kos of Eliyahu Hanavi. Okay. So now I just want to focus on a very, very simple question. Why is the redemption from Egypt described by 4 terms of redemption? Why? I mean, after all, Yetzias Mitzrayim was a single event that happened on Pesach. We were liberated from Mitzrayim. So that's one redemption. Why is it described as 4 redemptions? So let me share with you 2 midrashim that explain why the number 4 is connected to the Exodus. Medrash number 1 says that Pharaoh, whether it's the original Pharaoh or successor Pharaohs, actually promulgated at different times 4 different decrees against the Jewish people. And God had to extricate ourselves from those four evil decrees. Evil decree number one was slavery itself, imposing slavery on us. Evil decree number two is when he told the midwives, Yocheved and Miriam, Shifra and Puah, to, as soon as a Jewish male is born, strangle them. Now, Baruch Hashem, the Miyaldos didn't listen, but this was a gezerah that the Miyaldos should kill the babies. Gezerah number three was, when the Miyaldos didn't do that, he said that the soldiers should invade every house and throw males, sons, into the Nile. Which means those things actually happened way before Yetzias Mitzrayim, but they were part of the Gezeros. And the fourth Gezerah is the last Gezerah of Kash, that after Moshe Rabbeinu goes to Pharaoh the first time, so there's a Gezerah that the Jewish people have to gather their own straw. So Medrash number one says that the reason why there are four Lashonot of Geula is because God redeemed us from the four Gezeros of Pharaoh. The Gezerah of slavery, the Gezerah of the midwives killing the babies, which they didn't do, the Gezerah of the soldiers killing the babies, and the Gezerah that the Jewish people had to gather their own straw. Right? So four Lashonos of Geula, Keneged, corresponding to the four Gezeros of Pharaoh. By the way, just as a point of information, how many years were the Jews actually slaves in Egypt? So it's important to know that from the time Yaakov came to Mitzrayim, after Yosef revealed himself, till Yetzias Mitzrayim in the days of Moshe, is 210 years. So the total amount of time that we sojourned in Mitzrayim was 210 years. But the slavery did not start until Yosef and all of the tribes had died. Yaakov, Yosef, all of the tribes had died. And that took more than 100 years later, which means if we were in Mitzrayim only 210 years, and it was over 100 years till the last tribe died, or the last head of the tribe died, we were actually slaves for less than 100 years. So the total period of slavery in Egypt was almost 100 years, but it was actually less than a century. But be it as it may, Medrash number one correlates the 4 cups of wine to the 4 Gezeros of Pharaoh. Now, Medrash number 2 says the 4 terms of redemption are not even referring to Egypt. They are God's assurance that just as he redeemed us from the Egyptian exile, he will redeem us from the 4 exiles that we will suffer later throughout Jewish history. How is this? There's a very important theme, both in Chazal and ultimately it's rooted in the book of Daniel and other prophetic books, that the Jewish people are going to go through 4 exiles, meaning subjugation by 4 kingdoms, until the coming of Moshiach. This is not counting Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the prototype and precursor. There is Bavel, the Babylonian exile. There is the Persian exile. There is the Greek exile. And there is the Roman or the Edomite exile, because Rome is said to be descended from Esav. Golus Bavel, Golus Paras, Golus Yavan, Golus Edom. According to the Medrash, the 4 exiles are alluded to at the very beginning of the Torah, when the Torah says at the beginning of Bereshis, Haaretz haisa sayu vavayu, the world was astonishingly empty and jumbled, and there was darkness on the face of the deep. and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Remember that verse. So the Medrash says, Tayu, the world was desolate. That's an allusion to Babylon that emptied the world of the Beis HaMikdash because Babylonia destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. Bayu, confused. That's a remiss to Persia because Haman proclaimed this genocide against the whole nation. And it says the whole city of Shushan was confused. Darkness is Greece because the allurements of Greek culture darkened our eyes. We didn't see the beauty of the Torah. And the face of the deep is the Golus of Rome, which is a Golus that seemingly never ends. Remember, the Babylonian exile was only 70 years. The Persian occupation, so to speak, was only 52 years. The Greek was 200, and Rome was also 200. I'm sorry, Greek was 200, but the Rome, we're still in the Roman Golus even today. The Roman Golus is almost 2,000 years. So it's described as the face of the deep. And then when the pasuk says the Spirit of God hovers over the waters, that refers to Moshiach, that will come in the merit of Torah that is compared to water. So the notion of the four kingdoms, that's why if you look in the book of Daniel, everything is four. Daniel has many dreams and many visions, and they all involve four animals, four beasts, four different metals in a statue. All of it is connected to the four Malchios. Again, Bavel, Paras, Yavan, Edom. If you remember the Hanukkah song that we sang not so long ago, Ma'os Tzur, if you follow it, you will actually see it is devoted not just to Hanukkah. There's only one stanza about Hanukkah. It is really devoted to the four exiles. There's a stanza about Egypt, Mitzrayim, which is the precursor, then Babylonia, then Persia, then Greece, which is the Hanukkah one, Yevanim, right? And then the last one is a prayer that just as God has redeemed us from those other exiles, may He redeem us from the exile of Rome, of Edom. Now, a few questions. The Roman Empire is long gone, right? If you're a history buff, you know that the Roman Empire at one point, when it became a huge and ungovernable, unmanageable, it actually split into two empires. The Western Roman Empire, which had its capital in Rome, Italy, and then the Eastern Roman Empire, which became known as Byzantium, which had its capital in Constantinople. The official date, it's hard to know because the last decades of Rome, things were falling apart, Montgomery, but the official historical date for the collapse of the Western Roman Empire by the Goths, by various Germanic tribes, is said to be 476. But again, obviously, nothing b'diyuk happened 476, but that was kind of the end of it. Byzantium actually survived a lot longer. 1453, that is when the Turks overran the Byzantine Empire, and that they established the Ottoman Empire that lasted for 500 years. So, however you define the Roman Empire, whether it be the Western Roman Empire, which is 476, or the Eastern Roman Empire, which is 1453, they're long gone. Now, yes, Chazal did have a tradition that the Romans were descended from Esav. That's why it's called the Edomite Empire. But why are we still, I mean, we are described as being in the Galus of Edom. Right? What goes, right? Bavel is gone, Paras is gone, although Paras in Iran resurges, I'll come back to that. Yavan, the ancient Greek Empire is gone. But we are in the Roman exile. In what way are we in the Roman exile? There are no Romans around anymore. Even Italy, which is not a significant country really. I mean, they have good pasta, but they're not a world's power. But they're not Romans either. They are not ethnic Romans. So why are we in the Roman Gullus? Why is this described as Gullus Edom? So a few reasons. Reason number one is, even if the Romans are gone, but the Churban that they effected has not been changed. The Romans destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash in approximately the year 70 of the Common Era. And they exiled many, many Jews. They murdered many, many Jews. And they were machriv the Beis HaMikdash. We are still in that Gullus until the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt. The fact that the Romans are gone does not change the fact that the Gullus we're in, and even if we're living in Israel, and even if we're living in Jerusalem, we are in Gullus until Moshiach comes, and there's a binyan Beis HaMikdash. And that Churban happened by the Romans, so we're the Gullus of Edom. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that essentially Western civilization, as we know it, is fundamentally a product of Rome. Because what Rome did was, Rome took the ideas of Greek philosophy and democracy and government and politics, and Rome disseminated those ideas throughout the known world. So what became known as Western civilization, and most Jews in the world are under the rule of Western civilization, it's a product of Rome. Even the alphabet itself, the English alphabet itself, which is used by most countries in the world, most countries have the Latin alphabet or whatever it would be, is a product of Rome. And the third is Rome morphed into the head of Christianity. Right? Rome became the world center of Christianity, and in pre-Reformation, Catholicism was basically Christianity. Later, you had the Protestant Reformation, etc., with all sorts of breakaways and the like. And the fate of most Jews through most of history since Jesus has been linked to Christianity. And therefore we identify Christianity with Esav, with Edom. So there are three reasons why we are still in the Gullus of Edom. One is because their Churban Beis HaMikdash has never been undone. Two is the impact of Western civilization on Jews and Judaism. And the third is the influence of Christianity, both as an assimilation force and in terms of persecution, crusades, murders, genocides. Even Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany in many ways was a pagan movement. I wouldn't necessarily call it a Christian movement, but it actually drew on Christian motifs of Jews as, God killer or whatever it would be, as to kind of add fuel to the anti-Semitic campaigns. So that's why we are in the fourth exile. But there's another point here. The book of Daniel and Chazal only talk about four exiles: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But in another medrash, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, they talk about a fifth exile. And they say that the last exile that the Jewish people are going to face before the coming of Moshiach will be the exile of Yishmael. Not Esav. The Roman exile is the Gullus of Esav, Edom, the red one. But Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says that Bnei Yisrael will face the danger of the persecutions of Yishmael. Now, according to our tradition, the Arab... Now, Yishmael was obviously not a Muslim. That's incorrect, because Ishmael was born and died way, way, way before Muhammad existed. But Chazal do have a tradition that the Arabic peoples are descended from Ishmael. And as a result, what Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer is predicting is that before the coming of Moshiach, the Jewish people are going to be persecuted by the children of Ishmael. And that will be a persecution that will be much, much worse than the persecutions of the Edomites and the like. And it does give some reasons that it's hard for us to fully understand, and whatever. I get criticized when I mention it, but essentially it's the Medrash. The Medrash actually says, because Bnei Ishmael have certain spiritual merits that give them a power over us that the Edomites don't have. They have the merit of circumcision. They have the merit of prayer to God. They have the merit of modesty in dress. So although they're very evil, but there's a certain spiritual power that's there that makes them very hard to defeat. Someone who only has physical power can be defeated by a superior physical power. But someone that has a spiritual power can only be defeated by superior spiritual power. And therefore, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says, the enmity of Ishmael will be the most difficult enemy to try to defeat. And therefore they talk about a fifth exile. Now the question becomes, well, how can we talk about a fifth exile? I mean, the book of Daniel says 4. Chazal say 4, 4, 4. So in truth, you have to understand that Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer does not mean that Ishmael is a fifth exile. Rather, it's kind of an add-on to the fourth exile. Look at it in terms of Jews. Jews are overwhelmingly situated in Western countries. I mean, Israel itself is kind of a Western country, but certainly in the rest of the world, there are not that many Jews in Arabic countries today. Right? There just aren't. I mean, for whatever reason, they left, they were kicked out, they were killed. They're not there. Jewish populations are located in Edomite countries. But we and they are terrorized by Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism. So you don't look at the galut of Yishmael as a separate galut. If you look at it, I'll just leave this here. You don't look at it as a separate galus. You look at it as an intensification of Galus Edom. It's like the last stage of Galus Edom. And by the way, just to add to your anxieties, Maharal of Prague, who lived in the 1500s, a long time ago, brings that in the last stages, when the Edom will be the Esav will be joined by the Ishmael, Persia will have its resurgence as well. And of course, Persia is modern day Iran. Remember, Iran is not an Arabic country. Iran happens to be an Islamic country, but Iranians are not Arabs. Okay, so Arab countries, Hamas and those characters, they are from Ishmael. But Persia is not from Ishmael, and therefore they're a separate malchus, and they're always involved in genocide, just as they were in the time of Haman. Of course, that also brings in Amalek, which is a separate thing, but Haman, Amalek collaborated with Persia for genocide. So we're going to have this trifecta at the end of days, which hopefully we're in the end of days. And in that trifecta, we have Esav, we have Amalek, we have Ishmael, and we have Persia. And they all kind of come together, and they go against us in various ways. Okay, but to go back to the main point here, I was just trying to share with you two midrashim that say that why are there four Lashonos of redemption with respect to Yetzias Mitzrayim. So Medrash number 1 connects the four Lashonos of redemption to the four Gezeros of Pharaoh: slavery, the midwives being told to kill the babies, the soldiers being told to throw the babies in the water, and the Gezerah of gathering straw. So it's four Gezeros of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the second Medrash says that God is promising us a redemption from the four future exiles: the Golus of Babylon, Persia, Greece, from which Baruch Hashem we have been redeemed, and the Gezerah from the redemption from the Golus of Esav, which we have not yet been redeemed. And essentially what God is telling Moshe is, communicate to Bnei Yisrael good news and bad news. The good news is, Egypt is not the end of your exiles. You're going to have four more. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is, there will be a redemption from each of those exiles. Okay, so these are two different midrashim that you should focus on. So I want to share with you an amazing thought of the Chidushei Harim. The Chidushei Harim was the first Gera Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter. He was the father of the Sfas Emes, who also was a very, very famous and great Hasidic Rebbe. And he wants to correlate these midrashim in a very interesting way. You know, if you go back to the covenant of the parts, when Hashem gave Avram a very ominous prophecy that his children will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and they will be persecuted for 400 years. But the nation that oppresses them, I will judge, and the Jewish people will leave with great wealth. Remember, that's called the Bris Bein Absarim. So the famous question, the obvious question is, God told Avraham that your children will be enslaved in a land that is not theirs for 400 years. Now, we were, as I said before, in Mitzrayim only 210 years, and we were slaves for less than 100 years. So how do you reconcile the 400 years? So Rashi gives a very well-known interpretation that basically says, well, we're not counting the 400 years from the time we went into Egypt, because it doesn't say Egypt in that pasuk. It just says there'll be strangers in a land that is not theirs. That could even be in Eretz Yisrael. We are counting it from the birth of Yitzchak. Yitzchak never left Eretz Yisrael, but he was treated like a stranger by the local population. Meaning, the 400 years is from the birth of Yitzchak until the exodus of Egypt was 400 years. That's how Rashi understands it. But the other way of understanding it, which may not be inconsistent, because even Rashi might be referring to a recalibration because of emergency conditions, and that is the following. The Jewish people should have been in Mitzrayim 400 years, but they couldn't, because after 210 years, they had reached the 49th level of impurity. And by the way, that's the 1/5 that survived. 4/5 had died because they had hit the 50th level. The 1/5 was the 49th level of impurity. They worshipped idols, Avodah Zarah, except for the tribe of Levi. They didn't do circumcision, except for the tribe of Levi. They had reached the 49th level of impurity. Ad kedei kach, we don't even know what this means. When it says they could not let their dough rise, they had to bake it in matzah form. They couldn't let their dough rise. They didn't have enough time. Now, it doesn't take that long for dough to rise when you add water to flour and wait 18 minutes. That's enough to make it chametz. So what do you mean they didn't have enough time? So the Arizal learns, we don't even understand this. They were on the 49th level of Tumah. Once you hit the 50th level, you're irredeemable. If they would have stayed another few minutes in Mitzrayim, we don't even know what that means. They would have hit level 50, and they would have been goners. So God had to take them out. That moment, that second, 190 years early. Which means, God did not keep the 400 years. Because had it been 1 second more than the 210, we would have been gone. So God in his mercy took us out much earlier than we should have gone out. Because otherwise we would have disappeared. So that's good. But says the Chidushei HaRim, a bit of a sad thought. He said, had we been able to spend the 400 years in Mitzrayim without assimilating, we would have purged ourselves from all the impurities. And we would have been ready. There wouldn't have been a golden calf Avera. There wouldn't have been a Chet of Meraglim. We would have gotten the Torah. We would have gone straight into Eretz Yisrael with Moshe Rabbeinu. And essentially the Messianic Redemption of eternity would have taken place. But alas, because we did not complete the allotted time of purification, we left Mitzrayim with various impurities that caused the various sins in the desert, and indeed created the forces that resulted in the Golus of thousands and thousands of years. Cancer is a very good example. Let's imagine, God forbid, a person has cancer, and the cancer needs to be aggressively treated by chemotherapy. The chemotherapy is supposed to obliterate the cancerous cells. But the problem is chemotherapy can have very, very drastic side effects. Because when it's killing the bad stuff, it can also kill the good stuff. So sometimes chemotherapy has to be discontinued before it completed the job, because the intensity of the chemotherapy could itself kill the patient. So we got to stop the chemotherapy when there's still cancer in the patient's body. So you stop the chemotherapy, so in the short run, maybe he's okay now, but you've left that cancer in there like a ticking time bomb that's going to get worse and worse and worse, and may require a treatment that's more drastic than the original regimen would have been. This is exactly the situation here. The Jews needed 400 years of spiritual chemotherapy. But they couldn't take that. It would have killed them after the 210 years, so it was stopped. But the cancer was in us. And we need thousands of years of galus to erase it. Meaning, this is very upsetting a little bit. Had we been able to hold out 190 years more in Egypt, we would not need thousands of years of the exile. Because we couldn't hold out. So the cancer grows. We need all of this process. So says the Chidushei HaRim, and we don't have time to develop this at length, that is why the 4 decrees of Egypt actually correspond to the 4 exiles, because here's the idea. Since none of those decrees were able to run to their completion, meaning had each gezerah been fully carried out for the 400 years, we wouldn't need the 4 exiles. But precisely because those 4 gezerahs in Egypt did not run their course, that necessitated the 4 exiles. Okay, and the part that we don't have time to talk about, obviously, is he actually correlates each decree to the particular exile. So the decree of slavery corresponds to Babylon. The decree of the Miyaldos, of the midwives, corresponds to Persia. The decree of the soldiers drowning the babies corresponds to Greece. And the degree of gathering straw, scattering around, corresponds to Rome. I really hate to leave you in the lurch on this. Maybe Friday night I'll actually talk about this part of it. But he correlated. He says, all of the four Golios are because the four Gezeros and Mitzrayim were not allowed to run their course. And therefore there's a certain tragedy there. Hashem took us out early because he had to take us out early. And yet, there are going to be negative consequences in that early decision, because it left a certain tumor within us that the whole process of Golus needs to purify. Okay, we'll stop here. Have a good...
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to